Cassandra Mills, 34. I never thought a child's innocent words could shatter my entire existence. It was my father's 65th birthday when my 5-year-old nephew Tyler looked up at me with his big blue eyes that suddenly seemed foreign, and said, "Grandma told me you're not really part of our family." In that moment, the perfect life I thought I had begun to crack like thin ice beneath my feet. Hey everyone, before I dive into how those words changed everything, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below. If this family drama already has you intrigued, hit that like button and subscribe to join our storytelling community. I promise what happened next in my journey to uncover my family's darkest secret will have you questioning everything about blood, loyalty, and what it truly means to be family. Growing up in Burlington, Vermont, I always believed I was the cherished daughter of Robert and Eleanor Mills. Our family portrait was what many would consider the American dream: a successful father who worked as a respected cardiologist, a mother who balanced being a high school principal with maintaining our beautiful colonial home, and me, their supposedly beloved only child. Our home was the gathering place for extended family during holidays. Aunts, uncles, and cousins would crowd around our maple dining table, sharing stories and laughter, while my mother served her famous apple pie. I remember how my father would always toast to family being the most important thing in life. The irony of those words still stings today. My childhood memories were filled with ski trips to Stowe in the winter, sailing on Lake Champlain in summer, and weekend antiquing trips with my mother. I excelled in school, played first-chair violin in the youth orchestra, and was captain of the debate team. My parents beamed with pride at every recital and competition, or at least that's what I thought. There were signs, of course, looking back. The whispered conversations that would abruptly end when I entered a room. The strange looks from my maternal grandmother when she thought I wasn't watching. My mother's occasional unexplained crying episodes that my father would dismiss as just hormones. The old photo albums that mysteriously disappeared from our living room shelves when I was 12. My Aunt Patricia, my mother's younger sister, would sometimes look at me with an expression I couldn't quite place, something between sadness and guilt. Once, when I was 16, she started to say something about how much I looked like someone, but my mother cut her off with a sharp glare that silenced the room. I assumed it was just about resembling a distant relative, something trivial. When I turned 18 and left for Dartmouth College, I noticed my mother seemed almost relieved to see me go. I attributed it to empty nest syndrome, to her difficulty letting go. My father called me every Sunday without fail, asking about classes and friends, but always steering the conversation away when I mentioned coming home for short weekends. "Focus on your studies," he'd say. "There will be plenty of time for visits later." During my sophomore year, I dated a guy whose father was a geneticist. At a dinner with his family, the conversation turned to inherited traits, and his father became fascinated with my heterochromia. My left eye blue, my right eye hazel. "That's quite rare," he said. "Did either of your parents have it?" When I said no, he looked intrigued. "Interesting. It's usually hereditary." I remember feeling a strange chill at his words but brushed it off. After college, I moved to Boston to pursue a career in publishing. My parents seemed to approve of the distance, never suggesting I return to Vermont. Our relationship remained cordial but increasingly formal. Phone calls became less frequent, holidays more structured, conversations more superficial. I told myself it was just adulthood, the natural evolution of family relationships as we grow up and apart. Then 3 years ago I met Richard, a pediatric surgeon with kind eyes and a gentle manner. When things became serious, I brought him home to meet my parents. My mother was polite but reserved. My father, however, took to Richard immediately. Later I would understand why Richard represented a connection to a medical world my father valued, a world of science and genetics and biological certainty. We married last year in a beautiful ceremony on the Massachusetts coast. During the reception, I overheard my mother say to a distant relative, "At least she found someone good, that's all we ever wanted for her." The statement seemed odd, the "at least" hanging in the air like an unfinished thought. Then, Richard's sister had Tyler, making me an aunt by marriage. I adored that little boy from the moment I first held him. He had Richard's thoughtful expression and curious nature. Having no siblings of my own, I treasured my new role as Aunt Cassie. Tyler and I formed a special bond. I would read him stories for hours, build elaborate block castles, and take him to the park to feed ducks. He became the child I hadn't yet had a blood connection to family I'd always craved. When my father's 65th birthday approached, I organized a surprise party at their home in Vermont. I spent weeks planning, coordinating with relatives, ordering his favorite foods, and creating a slideshow of family photos. I wanted everything to be perfect, a celebration of our family and its enduring bonds. How could I have known that this event meant to honor family ties would be where those very ties would begin to unravel completely? "Grandma told me you're not really part of our family." Tyler's innocent words hung in the air like a grenade, with its pin pulled. The chatter around us at the birthday party suddenly seemed miles away, muffled as though I were underwater. I stared at my nephew's innocent face, trying to process what he'd just said. "What do you mean, sweetie?" I managed to ask, my voice barely audible. "Grandma Eleanor told Mommy that you're not really Grandpa Robert's daughter. She said it's a secret." He twisted the action figure in his hands, oblivious to how his words had just decimated my world. I looked across the room to where my mother stood, laughing with my aunt, a champagne flute in her hand. For a moment our eyes met and I saw it, the flash of panic that confirmed Tyler's words weren't just childish misunderstandings. She quickly looked away, but it was too late. I had seen the truth. The rest of the party passed in a blur. I moved mechanically through the motions, helping cut the cake, leading the chorus of "Happy Birthday," smiling for photographs that would forever capture the moment before and after my life changed irrevocably. Inside, my mind was racing with questions, memories rearranging themselves into a new uncomfortable pattern. When the last guest had left, I asked Richard to take Tyler home, saying I needed to help my parents clean up. The concern in his eyes told me my facade wasn't as convincing as I'd hoped, but he nodded and left without pressing the issue. As I stacked plates in the kitchen, my mother entered immediately, busying herself with wrapping leftover food. "We need to talk about what Tyler said," I stated, the tremor in my voice betraying my attempt at composure. "Children say the strangest things, don't they? Such imaginations." She didn't look at me, her hands moving with unnecessary speed. "Mom." My voice hardened. "Tyler said you told his mother that I'm not Dad's daughter, that it's a secret." The plastic wrap in her hands crinkled loudly in the silence that followed. Then slowly she set it down and turned to face me. The woman who had raised me, who I thought I knew better than anyone, suddenly looked like a stranger, older, harder, her eyes flat and defensive. "This isn't the time, Cassandra." "When is the time?" After another 34 years of lies, my voice rose despite my efforts to control it. My father appeared in the doorway, his celebration tie loosened, the lines of his face deepened by the shadows. "What's going on? Ask your wife." I said, the word wife suddenly sounding wrong on my tongue. "Ask her what secrets she's been keeping all these years." The look that passed between them, a practiced exchange of silent communication developed over decades, told me everything. This wasn't news to him. He knew. They both knew. "Sit down, Cassie," my father said, quietly gesturing to the kitchen table where I'd eaten countless meals, done homework, celebrated birthdays. It now felt like a witness stand. Over the next hour the truth emerged in halting fragments. My mother had had an affair 35 years ago with a colleague at her school, a visiting music teacher from New York named James Harrington. The affair had been brief but intense, and by the time she discovered she was pregnant, James had already returned to New York, unaware of the consequences of their relationship. Your father, Robert, agreed to raise you as his own, my mother explained, her voice mechanical, as though she'd rehearsed this confession many times. We decided it was better this way. A clean slate. Better for whom? I demanded, tears streaming down my face. Not for me. Not for a child who had a right to know her own identity. We gave you everything, my father interjected, his voice tinged with unexpected bitterness. The best schools, vacations, opportunities. What would knowing have changed? Everything. I slammed my hand on the table. It would have changed everything. My medical history, my sense of self, my understanding of who I am and where I came from. You robbed me of that. We protected you, my mother insisted, her composure finally cracking. James was unstable. Brilliant but troubled. He had bipolar disorder, struggled with substance abuse. We didn't want that legacy for you. That wasn't your decision to make, I whispered, the fight suddenly draining from me. My entire life has been built on a lie. Not a lie, my father said quietly. An omission. I loved you as my own Cassandra. I still do. But the words rang hollow. If he had truly loved me as his own, wouldn't he have trusted me with the truth? Wouldn't he have believed in my resilience, my right to my own history? I stood up, my chair scraping harshly against the floor. I need time to process this. Don't call me. Don't try to explain further. I'll reach out if I'm ready. I left them sitting in their perfect kitchen, in their perfect house, with the remnants of a birthday party, celebrating a family that I now realized had never truly existed. The drive back to Boston that night was a blur. Richard tried to comfort me, but his words seemed to float above me, unable to penetrate the thick fog of betrayal and confusion that enveloped me. When we arrived home, I immediately went to our spare bedroom and locked the door, needing solitude to begin processing the earthquake that had just leveled my life. Sleep evaded me that night as I scrolled through family photos on my phone, examining my features with new eyes. My heterochromia, the different colored eyes that had always made me feel special, suddenly became evidence of my genetic otherness. The high cheekbones that matched neither my mother's round face nor my father's angular one. My musical ability that had seemed to come from nowhere in a family of academic achievers. By morning, determination had replaced shock. I needed answers, real ones, not the sanitized version my parents had offered. I called in sick to work and began my investigation with the most obvious source, the internet. James Harrington. The name felt foreign yet oddly familiar on my lips as I typed it into the search bar. There were dozens of results, but filtering by music teachers in New York during the early 90 seconds narrowed it down. I found an old faculty page from a prestigious arts academy in Manhattan, with a grainy photo that made my heart skip, a tall man with one hazel eye visible in the black and white image, high cheekbones prominent even in the poor quality photograph. Next came social media. James wasn't on Facebook or Instagram, not surprising for someone of his generation, but LinkedIn provided a lead. He had retired from teaching 7 years ago, but was listed as a composer and music consultant. His profile mentioned a current residence in Brooklyn. "What are you going to do?" Richard asked when he came home that evening, to find me surrounded by printouts and notes. "I'm going to New York this weekend," I replied, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "I need to meet him, Richard. I need to know where I came from." Richard's concern was evident. "Do you want me to come with you?" I shook my head. "This is something I need to do alone." "But thank you." I squeezed his hand, grateful for his understanding. Before confronting James, I needed more ammunition. I ordered a DNA test kit that promised results within 2 weeks. While waiting, I dug deeper into James Harrington's background. I discovered he had indeed struggled with bipolar disorder, as my mother had claimed, but had been stable for many years, according to an interview in a mental health awareness magazine. He had never married but had maintained long-term relationships. There was no mention of children. His music career had been impressive: compositions performed by the New York Philharmonic, guest lecturing positions at Juilliard, 2 Grammy nominations for film scores. The more I learned, the more I felt a strange pride mingled with resentment. This talent could have been part of my life. This man could have guided my musical education beyond what the local violin teacher in Vermont had offered. The DNA results arrived faster than expected. I opened the email with trembling hands. 0% chance of Robert Mills being my biological father. While not surprising given what I now knew, seeing the scientific confirmation was another blow. Attached was an ancestry breakdown showing genetic markers common in people of Irish and Eastern European descent, neither part of the English and German heritage I'd always claimed on medical forms. Armed with this evidence and James's address obtained through a background check service that cost more than I care to admit, I boarded a train to New York on a crisp Saturday morning. Brooklyn's Park Slope neighborhood was lined with brownstones and tree-lined streets. James lived in a 4th-floor walk-up in a well-maintained building. Standing on the sidewalk, looking up at what might be his window, I nearly lost my nerve. What right did I have to disrupt this man's life? What if he rejected me, or worse, had no interest in knowing the daughter he never knew existed? As I debated whether to proceed, an older man exited the building. He was tall and lean, with a shock of silver hair and a leather messenger bag slung across his chest. Even from a distance, I could see one hazel eye catching the sunlight. My breath caught in my throat. "James Harrington," I called out before I could stop myself. He turned curious rather than alarmed. "Yes." Walking closer, I struggled to find the right words. "My name is Cassandra Mills. I believe you knew my mother, Eleanor Mills, in Burlington, Vermont, in 1990. His expression shifted from confusion to shock as he studied my face, his eyes lingering on mine. "My God," he whispered. "Your eyes. One blue, one hazel." He took a step back, steadying himself against the building's facade. "Eleanor's daughter." "Yes," I said, then added the words that had brought me here, "and yours." James invited me to a nearby cafe, both of us too shaken for the privacy of his apartment. Over coffee that neither of us drank, I explained everything: the birthday party revelation, my parents' confession, the DNA test. "I had no idea," he said repeatedly, his composer's hands trembling slightly. "Eleanor never told me she was pregnant. We ended things when I returned to New York, but had I known..." His voice trailed off. "Would you have wanted to know me?" I asked the question that had haunted me since learning the truth. "Without question," he replied, without hesitation. "I always wanted children. The timing with Eleanor was wrong, the relationship impossible to maintain, but a child, my child, I would have moved mountains to be part of your life." His words both healed and hurt. The father, I could have had the relationship that had been stolen from both of us. James asked about my life, his face lighting up when I mentioned my childhood violin lessons. "Do you still play?" "Not as much as I'd like," I admitted. "Work gets in the way." "What instrument did you play?" I asked, hungry for connections, for shared traits that went beyond our matching eyes. "Piano primarily, but I can play most string instruments. The cello was always my favorite." He smiled. "My mother, your grandmother, was a concert pianist. Music runs deep in our blood." "Our blood." The phrase hit me with unexpected force. As afternoon turned to evening, James shared photos from his wallet, his parents, my grandparents I had never known, his sister, my aunt, who had passed away 5 years earlier, cousins I had never met. Each image was another piece of the puzzle of my identity slowly falling into place. Before we parted, James hesitantly asked if he could hug me. I nodded, and as his arms encircled me, I felt a strange sense of recognition, not from memory, but from something deeper, something cellular and profound. "I'd like to get to know you, Cassandra," he said as we parted. "If you're willing." "I'd like that too," I replied, realizing it was true. This wasn't about replacing Robert, the man who had raised me. It was about claiming the full truth of who I was. As I headed back to Boston that night, I felt both lighter and heavier, burdened with new complexities, but freed from the weight of unacknowledged truths. 2 months after meeting James, I had established a routine of weekly phone calls and monthly visits to New York. Each conversation revealed new connections between us, shared mannerisms, similar tastes in books and music, even the same habit of humming when concentrating. These discoveries were bittersweet, each one a reminder of what I had missed for 34 years. "You have his laugh," Richard observed, after I returned from a weekend in Brooklyn, where James had introduced me to his circle of friends as my daughter Cassandra. The pride in his voice when he said those words had brought tears to my eyes. "It's strange," I told Richard as we prepared dinner in our kitchen. "I feel like I'm grieving and celebrating at the same time. I'm finding this amazing connection with James, but I'm also mourning the relationship we never had." Richard nodded, his surgeon's hands precise as he chopped vegetables. "Have you thought more about reaching out to your parents?" "My parents?" The term felt complicated now. They had called repeatedly in the weeks after the birthday party, leaving voicemails that grew increasingly desperate. I had responded with a single text, "I need space. Please respect that." Eventually the calls stopped. "I'm not ready," I admitted. "Part of me is so angry I can barely think straight. They robbed me of my identity, of my relationship with James, of medical information that could have been crucial." I set down my knife, the weight of resentment heavy in my chest. "And yet, they're still the people who raised you," Richard finished for me. "For better or worse." Later that night, as Richard slept beside me, I scrolled through social media and noticed my cousin had posted photos from a family gathering at my parents' house. My mother looked thin, her usually perfect hair dull and unstyled. My father, Robert, sat slightly apart from the group, his expression vacant. They looked broken, and despite everything, I felt a pang of guilt. The next morning, I received an unexpected email from Aunt Patricia, my mother's sister, the one who had almost said something when I was 16. "Cassandra," it read, "I understand your anger and I won't ask you to forgive your parents yet. But there are things you don't know context that might help you make sense of what happened. I'm not justifying their choices, just offering perspective. If you're willing to hear it, I'll be at Maple Creek Cafe tomorrow at 2 p.m. No pressure. Love always, Aunt Pat." I debated ignoring the message, but found myself driving to Vermont the next day, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. The cafe was a small establishment on the outskirts of Burlington, far enough from my parents' home that I wouldn't risk running into them. Aunt Patricia was already there when I arrived, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun. She stood to embrace me, and I allowed it, surprising myself with how much I had missed her steady presence. "Thank you for coming," she said as we sat down. "I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't," I admitted. "But I have questions that need answers." Patricia nodded, stirring her tea methodically. "I want to start by saying I disagreed with how Eleanor and Robert handled this. I thought you deserved the truth, especially once you became an adult. But it wasn't my secret to tell." "Then why tell me now?" I asked. "Because the damage is already done," she said simply. "And because I love you and hate seeing this rift destroying everyone." She took a deep breath before continuing. "What your mother told you about James's mental health struggles was true, but incomplete. When Eleanor met him, James was undiagnosed and self-medicating with alcohol. Their affair wasn't some grand romance, it was a desperate escape for both of them." I frowned, trying to reconcile this with the composed, thoughtful man I had come to know. "James has been stable for years. He's successful, respected in his field." "Now yes," Patricia agreed. "But back then he was volatile, unpredictable. When Eleanor discovered she was pregnant, she was terrified not just of the scandal in our small community, but of bringing a child into that chaotic situation." "That still doesn't justify—" "I'm not finished," Patricia interrupted gently. What your mother never told you, what she's never told anyone except Robert and me, was that she had planned to leave Robert for James. Despite everything, she had fallen in love with him. She went to New York to find him, to tell him about the pregnancy. This was new information, a twist I hadn't anticipated. What happened? Patricia's eyes clouded with old pain. She found him in the middle of a manic episode in a relationship with another woman living in squalor. He didn't even recognize Eleanor at first. When he did, he lashed out, accused her of trying to trap him. I shook my head in disbelief. That doesn't sound like the James I know. The James you know has had decades of proper treatment therapy and hard work, Patricia replied. People change, especially when they get the help they need. But Eleanor only knew the James from before. She returned to Vermont, devastated, convinced that telling him about the pregnancy would be a mistake. And Robert, I asked, thinking of the man who had attended every school play, taught me to drive, walked me down the aisle. Robert had his own struggles, Patricia said quietly. What few people know is that he and Eleanor had been trying for a baby for 5 years before you came along. 3 miscarriages had left them heartbroken. When Eleanor told him about the pregnancy about James, he saw it as their miracle, a child they could raise together. I sat back trying to absorb this new narrative. So he knew from the beginning, yes. The decision to raise you as his own wasn't just about appearances or avoiding scandal. He genuinely wanted to be your father. Patricia reached across the table to touch my hand. I'm not saying they were right to keep the truth from you. I'm just saying their choices came from a place of love and fear, not malice. Why didn't they ever tell me? Even as an adult, Patricia sighed. The longer a secret is kept, the harder it becomes to reveal. They feared losing you. And perhaps they feared facing their own guilt. Each year that passed made the truth seem more dangerous. As I drove back to Boston that evening, Aunt Patricia's words echoed in my mind. The story was more complex than I had imagined, the motivations more nuanced. It didn't erase the betrayal, but it painted my parents' both sets in a more human light. I pulled over at a scenic overlook on the highway, watching the sun set over the distant mountains. The beauty of the Vermont landscape, so familiar and yet now somehow different, brought unexpected tears. This had been my home, these people, my family, regardless of genetics. The anger that had fueled me these past months began to soften around the edges, making space for something more complicated, something that felt like the beginning of understanding, if not forgiveness. Hey everyone! I know this is an intense moment in the story, and I can see from your comments that many of you are feeling the emotions right along with me. Before I continue with what happened next in this family revelation, I'd love to know, have you ever discovered something that completely changed how you viewed your family history? Sometimes the most profound connections come after the most difficult truths are revealed. If you're finding value in this story, please hit that like button and subscribe to support more authentic storytelling like this. Now let's continue with how I navigated the complicated emotions of having 2 fathers and a lifetime of hidden truths. The following weeks became an exercise in emotional compartmentalization. I continued building my relationship with James, discovering with each visit more pieces of myself reflected in him. We shared not just heterochromia, but also a tendency toward perfectionism, a love of thunderstorms, and an almost pathological punctuality that Richard often teased me about. James had begun composing a piece for violin and piano. For my daughter, he called it, and hearing him play the early drafts on his baby grand piano in his Brooklyn apartment brought tears to my eyes. This was the heritage I had been denied, the connection to music that had always called to me but that I'd never fully understood. Meanwhile, my relationship with my parents remained frozen in painful silence. I replayed Aunt Patricia's revelations, repeatedly trying to reconcile the frightened young woman my mother had been with the controlled, sometimes distant mother I had known. Trying to see Robert not as the deceiver but as the man who had chosen to love another man's child. Richard, ever my anchor, suggested, That continued estrangement was hurting everyone, including me. You don't have to forgive them to talk to them, he pointed out. But not talking is preventing any possibility of healing. I knew he was right, but pride and lingering anger made the prospect of reaching out daunting. In the end, it was an unexpected health scare that forced my hand. Robert had suffered a minor heart attack, according to a text from Aunt Patricia. He was stable, but the incident had left my mother shattered. I called my mother that same evening, the first time I had heard her voice in over 3 months. Cassandra, she sounded disbelieving, vulnerable in a way I had rarely heard. I heard about Dad. I said the word Dad slipping out automatically. Is he okay? Yes, the doctors say he'll recover fully. Her voice caught. He'd love to hear from you. It would mean everything to him. The longing in her voice pierced through my defenses. I'm not ready to forgive everything, I said carefully. But I don't want to lose him, either of you, before we've had a chance to work through this. That's all we can ask for, she replied, a tremulous hope in her voice. The next day I drove to the hospital in Burlington. Standing outside Robert's room, I took several deep breaths, preparing myself for the conversation ahead. When I entered, I was shocked by how small he looked in the hospital bed, his usually commanding presence, diminished by illness, and perhaps by grief. Cassie, he whispered, reaching out a hand that seemed more fragile than I remembered. I took it, feeling the familiar calluses from his woodworking hobby. Hi, Dad. His eyes filled with tears at the word. I didn't think I'd hear you call me that again. You've been my dad for 34 years, I said simply. That doesn't just disappear. We talked for hours that afternoon, really talked in a way we never had before. He spoke of his devastation upon learning of my mother's affair, his initial rage giving way to a desperate hope when she revealed her pregnancy. I had wanted to be a father for so long, he explained. When your mother came back from New York, destroyed by what she had found there, I saw a chance for all of us. A family. But why never tell me the truth? I asked, the question that had haunted me. Robert sighed, looking older than his 65 years. At first it was simple, you were an infant, then a toddler. The question didn't arise. As you grew, your mother and I convinced ourselves it would only confuse you, hurt you unnecessarily. By the time you were a teenager, the lie had become our reality. He looked at me directly, his eyes clear, despite his weakened state. It was wrong, Cassandra. I see that now. We thought we were protecting you, but we were really protecting ourselves from facing our mistakes. My mother joined us later, sitting tentatively on the edge of the bed. The three of us talked until visiting hours ended, not resolving everything, but beginning the painful process of honesty that should have started decades earlier. As I prepared to leave, Robert asked the question I had been dreading. Have you found him, James? I nodded, watching their faces carefully. Yes. We've been getting to know each other. My mother's expression tightened, but she made a visible effort to relax it. Is he? Well, he is, I confirmed. He's been stable and successful for many years. He's a composer, a teacher. He's kind. I'm glad, Robert said, surprising me with his sincerity. You deserve to know him. Over the next few months, I established a new normal: regular calls with my parents, monthly visits to Vermont, continued development of my relationship with James in New York. It was exhausting at times, navigating the complex emotions of all involved, including my own. James expressed interest in meeting Robert and Eleanor, a prospect that filled me with both hope and trepidation. They raised you, he said simply. They gave you the stability I couldn't have provided then. I owe them a debt of gratitude for that. The meeting finally happened on neutral ground, a restaurant halfway between Burlington and New York. The tension was palpable, as introductions were made. Three people, connected by life-altering decisions, made decades ago, now facing each other across a table. Thank you, James said after an awkward silence, addressing both Robert and Eleanor. For giving Cassandra a good life. For being there when I couldn't be. Robert nodded stiffly, his doctor's eyes assessing the man who shared his daughter's genetic material. "She was easy to love," he replied. "Still is." My mother said little throughout the meal, watching James with an unreadable expression. Only as we were preparing to leave did she speak directly to him. "You've changed," she observed, her voice neutral. "For the better, I hope," James replied with a gentle smile. "Yes," she agreed after a moment. "For the better." It wasn't a Hollywood reconciliation, no tearful embraces or instantaneous healing of old wounds. But it was a beginning, an acknowledgement that the past, while immutable, didn't have to define our future relationships. As James and I walked to our cars afterward, he turned to me with an expression of wonder. "Do you know what amazes me most about all this? What, that, out of such a mess, my illness, your mother's unhappiness, the secrets and pain, came someone like you." He gestured to encompass all of me. "Someone strong enough to forge connections, rather than sever them, even after learning the truth." His words stayed with me long after, a reminder that identity isn't fixed or singular. I was still Cassandra Mills, daughter of Robert and Eleanor, but I was also discovering what it meant to be Cassandra Harrington Mills, daughter of James. The two identities weren't mutually exclusive, but rather complementary parts of a whole self I was only now beginning to fully understand. 6 months after my world had been upended by a child's innocent words, I found myself standing in my childhood bedroom in Vermont, packing away old memorabilia. My mother had suggested the task as part of their planned downsizing to a smaller home, but we both knew it was also symbolic, a sorting through of the past to determine what to keep, what to discard, and what to reframe. "I found these," my mother said, from the doorway, holding a small wooden box I had never seen before. "I think it's time you had them." Inside were letters, dozens of them addressed to Eleanor Mills, postmarked from New York, dating back to the months after she had returned from her disastrous trip to find James. They were never opened. "I couldn't bear to read them," my mother explained, her voice thick with emotion. "I was too hurt, too scared of what they might say. But they belong to you now." That night, alone in the guest room that had once been mine, I carefully opened the first envelope, the glue brittle with age. James's handwriting was distinctive, flowing yet precise, much like his musical compositions. "Eleanor," the first letter began, "I cannot adequately express my remorse for how I behaved when you visited. The man you encountered was not me, or rather was the worst version of me, unmedicated and lost. I have sought help since then, begun treatment that is already making a difference." Letter after letter documented James's journey toward stability, his diagnosis, his therapy, his commitment to sobriety and medication. In the later ones, he inquired about her well-being, asked if there was any chance of reconciliation or at least friendship. The final letter, dated 6 months after the first, was the most heartbreaking. "I understand your silence as the answer it is," he wrote. "I respect your decision to move forward without me in your life. Know that the door remains open on my end should you ever wish to walk through it. I will always remember our time together, brief, though it was, as a bright spot in a dark period. Be well, Eleanor." I called James the next morning, my voice still rough from crying. "Did you know?" I asked without preamble when he answered. Know what? His confusion seemed genuine. "That my mother was pregnant when she came to see you in New York." There was a long silence on the line. "No," he finally said, his voice strained. "God, no. She never told me. She found you with another woman. You were having a manic episode." Another silence. "I don't remember much from that period," he admitted. "Before I got proper treatment, there are gaps." "But Cassandra, had I known about you, no matter what state I was in, I believe you," I interrupted, surprising myself with the truth of it. "I'm not calling to blame you. I'm calling because I think you deserve to know what happened, and because—" I hesitated, then pushed forward. "Because I think my mother deserves your forgiveness, just as she's working toward earning mine." The revelation of the letters created yet another shift in our complex family dynamic. James asked if he could write to my mother a proper response 35 years delayed. She agreed, and their cautious correspondence became another thread in the tapestry of reconciliation we were all attempting to weave. Richard observed these developments with his characteristic thoughtfulness. Family trees are rarely as straight and simple as we pretend they are, he noted one evening, as we discussed the possibility of starting our own family. Most have twisted branches, unexpected grafts, hidden roots. Are you worried? I asked, understanding his unspoken concern. About passing down James's bipolar disorder. I'm a doctor, he reminded me gently. I know mental health conditions are manageable with proper treatment. And I know that the greatest gift we can give any child is honesty about who they are and where they come from. His words crystallized something I had been feeling but hadn't articulated. The true damage hadn't come from James's genetic contribution to my DNA, but from the secret that had been kept, the identity that had been hidden from me. As if to underscore this revelation, I received an unexpected call from Tyler's mother, Richard's sister Jennifer. Tyler's been asking about you, she said tentatively. He knows he upset you somehow at the birthday party, but he doesn't understand why. He misses his Aunt Cassie. I felt a pang of guilt. In my focus on my own pain and healing, I had neglected the innocent child who had unwittingly triggered it all. Tell him I miss him too, I said, and that I'd love to see him this weekend, if that works for you. That Saturday, I took Tyler to the park, watching him race around the playground with the boundless energy of a 5-year-old. When he tired himself out and came to sit beside me on the bench, I took a deep breath and addressed what had happened. Do you remember what you told me at Grandpa's birthday party? I asked gently. About what Grandma Eleanor said, he nodded solemnly. That you're not really part of the family. Was that a bad secret? It wasn't true the way Grandma meant it. I explained, choosing my words carefully. Family isn't just about who shares your blood. It's about who loves you and who you love back. Grandpa Robert and Grandma Eleanor are my family because they raised me and love me. And I have another father too named James, who I'm just getting to know. Tyler considered this, his face scrunched in concentration. So you have 2 dads, that's pretty cool. I laughed, marveling at the simplicity with which children can sometimes grasp concepts adults complicate. Yes, I guess it is pretty cool. And you're still my Aunt Cassie, he asked, a hint of worry in his voice. Always, I promised, pulling him into a hug. Nothing will ever change that. As summer turned to fall, we established new traditions. Sunday dinners at my parents' new cozier home in Vermont. Monthly concerts in New York where James often performed. Holiday gatherings that now included both Robert and James, their initial awkwardness gradually evolving into a unique kind of friendship based on their shared connection to me. One particularly meaningful moment came when James invited me to perform with him at a charity concert in Manhattan, his composition For My Daughter now completed. As we played together on stage, my violin complementing his piano, I felt a sense of wholeness I had never experienced before. Both my fathers were in the audience, Robert beside my mother, both with tears in their eyes as they watched the daughter they had raised discover another part of her heritage. The journey hadn't been easy. There had been, still were, moments of anger, of grief for what might have been. But there was also a new appreciation for the complexity of human relationships, for the imperfect ways we love each other, for the possibility of redemption and second chances. Tyler's innocent revelation had shattered the perfect family facade I had always believed in. But from those fragments, something new and perhaps more authentic had emerged. A family defined not by biology alone or by unblemished appearances, but by the messy, complicated truth of who we are and how we choose to love each other despite our flaws. Today marks 1 year since my nephew's innocent words changed everything. We're celebrating my father's, Robert's, 66th birthday, but this time with no secrets hanging in the air. James is here too, having driven up from New York for the occasion. The two men who share the title of father in my life now sit across from each other at the dining table, engaged in a surprisingly animated discussion about jazz. My mother moves around the kitchen with a lightness I haven't seen in years, the burden of her 3-decade secret finally lifted. Tyler darts between the adults, proudly showing off a drawing he made of our special family tree, with 2 branches extending from me, one to Robert and Eleanor, one to James. As I watch this scene impossible to imagine a year ago, I'm struck by how truth, even painful truth, can ultimately heal what secrets inevitably damage. The family I thought I had may have been an illusion, but the family I've discovered is real, with all its complications and imperfections. Hey everyone, thank you so much for following my family's journey through this incredible year of discovery and healing. Has your family ever experienced a moment of truth that changed everything? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this tale of family secrets, redemption, and the true meaning of family touched you, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more authentic life stories. Also, don't forget to share this with someone who might be struggling with family secrets or identity issues. Sometimes knowing we're not alone in these experiences is the greatest comfort. Remember, it's never too late for truth and healing in our relationships. Until next time, this is Cassandra, grateful for every branch of my complicated family tree.